Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti, and with me today is Ash Ganley, CEO of GrowRay Technologies. Thank you very much for joining me today, Ash.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, first, before we get started, I want to ask everybody to please like, subscribe, or share the podcast. It really helps us as we continue to grow this thing. All right, Ash, could you start off by telling us a little bit about GrowRay, what it is that you do and manufacture?
Absolutely. GrowRay is a collaborative manufacturing and R&D effort that creates patented LED lighting solutions for cannabis cultivation.
Okay.
It's really through the partnership of two companies. One is NOBO Incorporated, which is a boutique or smaller multi-state operator vertically integrated in both Michigan and Colorado, and GrowRay, whose origins are PhD designed academic research for plant cultivation via LED. So how did that work out? Did GrowRay spin out of NOBO? No, they were independent companies, and I happen to be a co-founder of both, and so it was a natural partnership that emerged due to kind of the fractured and isolated nature of products and R&D and then actual cannabis cultivation in the space. It's been kind of missing from the space, if you will, for a number of years, that kind of natural, transparent partnership between the practical realities of cannabis cultivation and then vendor research, technology research. So pairing the two together allowed us to develop LED technology from the point of view of enhancement of the SOPs around the LED technology, not just the lights and the spectrum and the other IP aspects themselves.
So it says that GrowRay is, owned and operated by cultivators. So were you on the cultivation side of NOBO before co-founding GrowRay?
Yeah, I was the CTO at NOBO. And so I've been involved in cultivation for years in different ways. So
tell me what it's like running a company. Like, I've noticed that in the industry a lot as well, that there's not a lot of product R&D going on. A lot of people are just sort of ordering from a catalog, for lack of a better term. So was it that you recognized a need in the market and kind of started R&D from there?
Yeah, that's actually well put. I think to summarize it is that there was really a big lack of efficiency in cannabis. And the reasons for that are as you described. It's the simple fact that you had a series of non-cannabis technology vendors marketing to a space that is coming out of a pre-legal growing culture. And the enmeshment between those two unlike concepts created a lot of confusion, lack of trust, lack of transparency. And so integration is not a word you heard early on in terms of how to select, implement, and optimize the technologies that you need to put into a controlled environment agriculture situation where you're growing cannabis.
Man, as anyone that has ever registered for a trade show with checking the box and interest in lighting knows, man, everyone that makes a lamp is going to email you after that trade show.
Oh man, no kidding. The space is very crowded, and there are some common themes among most of the competitors that you will see that have contributed to this bottleneck. But the glass ceiling has certainly been broken with LED, and a lot of it has to do with not just the lights themselves, but how to use them properly to achieve results that are superior to, or at least equal to, legacy technologies from lighting.
So I read that you started GrowRay to increase efficiency, productivity, and sustainability. Could you tell me how you go about doing that?
Sure. So efficiency, LED lighting is obviously much more efficient than traditional HID lighting, just by the nature of what it is, how it uses electricity to generate photons in an optically focused way in specific spectrums. So that alone is efficient. Now, also, from the implementation of LED, you get ancillary efficiencies, like the requirement for less HVAC, both CapEx and OpEx for the total load. And you also look at other efficiencies you can get from LED, meaning shorter turn times, better production, less use of water, and on. So there are a number of offshoots of LED implementation that naturally ascribe to a lower kW footprint and more efficiencies.
Do you run into trouble because it's a new technology, sort of convincing people to bring it in-house?
I would say that 2 years ago, we ran into a lot of trouble convincing people to use LED technology for a number of reasons. Over the past year and a half, we've kind of crossed the chasm, so to speak, and we're just emerging past that early adopter phase to where the technology in general is more embraced by cultivators as cannabis spreads into different states.
So what was it like going from a CTO to essentially a product developer?
Well, it didn't change much, honestly. Developing the product is just one part of what we do. At GrowRay, we found that because we have cultivation expertise as well, that what we can do as a company to provide value to our clients goes well beyond just delivering like the best lighting solution for cannabis in the world. We're able to really be passive and active consultants that really draw from both companies' kind of core expertise sets to really help clients identify, for example, what types of HVAC works best with LED, what kind of pruning and nutrient regimens support the enhanced amount of light and the focus spectrum that LEDs deliver, and on and on and on. What room size works best? What genetics respond to different light patterns? So we have this kind of core expertise that goes so far beyond lighting that it becomes almost more of an inclusive consulting package that comes along with our lights. And so everybody that works in quote unquote sales for GrowRay is really a cultivation advisor as opposed to a lighting salesperson.
Is it difficult to get people to switch to your technology versus if they're just starting an indoor grow? I can see how if you get in on the grow or in the on the ground floor, it's easier because you can kind of design around it. Go ahead.
It can be. It really depends. Every deal is different. Every client's different. It's getting easier as that kind of mythology around LED. Where the early entrance into the market of LED didn't perform for a variety of reasons that didn't just have to do with the technology itself, although that's a big part of it. It also had to do with how to use the focused optics of LED in a way that gets better results than legacy technology. So for many years, that was poorly understood, and so the results that spoke for themselves increased that bottleneck or tightened that bottleneck for adoption of LED technology. Now, anecdotally, and with those who are willing to share data, we've kind of cracked the glass ceiling there. So cultivators who have been willing to embrace the new technology, willing to embrace the SOPs around that technology, are starting to get results that are equal to or superior to previous ways of growing, but just using less electricity and more longevity for the products. And now they start to talk, and critical mass is being built. So we're in the midst right now of a much quicker adoption of LEDs based on that kind of anecdotal support from commercial growers around the world.
What was it about early generation LEDs that didn't perform?
Great question. So number one, the form factor. A couple of the first companies to develop LEDs for cannabis simply rebranded high bay fixtures that were designed for warehouse and commercial lighting and rebranded them with their own name or logo and changed the spectrum slightly to feature more blue and red diodes. Those original LEDs were all what we call shoebox style fixtures, meaning you have a flat rectangular surface that on which the diodes sit that then casts a cone of light out. And on top of that, all the sensitive electronics and high wattage stuff sits in an aluminum shell through which two computer style fans pass air. There are so many things wrong with that as a form factor. Number one, you can't deliver a uniform cone of light when your diodes are compressed into an arbitrarily small surface area, unless you apply secondary lensing underneath the fixture and on top of those diodes to spread the light out. So a lot of those early LEDs, when positioned over the canopy, would generate what's called a flashlight effect, where the middle of the canopy right underneath the light would get plenty of light, sometimes too much, while the edges received far too little light to perform. So you got what was called conical grows, where in a 4x4 area, the edges underperformed, the middle would get light burn, and the fixture itself, because you're not passively cooling, you're actively cooling very high temperature, high wattage componentry with off-the-shelf computer fans, that would end up failing thermally. So it created a cascading effect where those early LED companies, and some still manufacture with that form factor, left a bad taste experientially in the mouths of many growers. And so that's when the concept of LED certainly is the future, but is not the present, really emerged. And that would be anything from 2012 to, say, 2017, 2018.
So were you one of those growers that sort of got burned by legacy LED technology and just figured there's got to be a better way?
Yes and no. So as a grower early on, the companies I worked with took a chance on some early level and entry level first generation LEDs and did indeed get burned. Then emerged a couple of new companies that went with a different form factor that you call the multi-bar form factor, meaning you have a series of bars longitudinally mounted over a latitudinal chassis, which creates a uniform footprint of light. Once you do that, then you can actually kind of start looking at it as an apples to apples comparison in terms of getting a uniform footprint of light, which is the first baseline to crack. There's a lot more behind that, but once that happened, a couple of companies early on in 2012, 2013 rolled those types of products out, and that's when the conversation started to shift.
So tell me about the new patent that you recently received for triangular extrusion, the triangular extrusion shade bar, and how that compares to other tech currently on the market.
Great, thank you. So that is specifically for greenhouse cannabis cultivation. Mm-hmm. Once again, this goes back to the uniformity of light distribution as the primary gating factor for the success and adoption of LED. What the triangular extrusion does is allows us to be the only company that can deploy that multi-bar fixture, meaning that only kind of fixture that delivers a uniform footprint of light in a greenhouse. The reason we're the only ones that can do it is because the triangular extrusion actually redirects natural sunlight back down onto the canopy beneath it through the highly polished, specifically angled aluminum surface of the bar itself. That eliminates the shading profile to a degree where you can then take advantage of that uniformity of light footprint you can only get from a multi-bar solution. Other manufacturers have chosen to address the shading issue, the shading profile issue, by simply shrinking their form factor, shrinking their fixtures down into the smallest volume or footprint that they can possibly do. And that comes at the expense of uniformity of light distribution on the canopy beneath it. And the economic impacts of that are significant.
So how long was this shade bar under development?
A couple of years.
Yeah.
A couple of years. Yeah. We've always tried to solve things, as simply as possible. And as analog as possible first before we go to software or modeling. And this was just kind of just a common sense approach that we were surprised nobody else had tried yet. Why not just use a highly polished aluminum surface, and we need aluminum anyway for the heat sinks? Why not just use the benefits of that as a sun reflector to reflect light down the canopy so we can deliver this? So once we had that developed, we modeled it. We first modeled it out in MathCAD, right, and made sure that it worked theoretically. And then we did R&D at our small shop here in Boulder, Colorado, and figured out that it actually does do what we thought it would do. And then from there, we went to some more R&D, and then within about a year, we knew that the results were kind of game changing, and so we released that product.
So do you remember that aha moment where you're just like, what was that like? And because the way you describe it is it's so simple. Why isn't everyone doing this already? Can you kind of describe that aha moment?
Yeah, I can. So the aha moment came from a gentleman named Pat Adamson. Mm-hmm. Pat was the lead engineer at GrowRay for a period of time. And we had been struggling on how to deploy fixtures into cannabis greenhouses without shading. And we had talked about different form factors. We had talked about having literal mirrors that went like this between the bars. And we designed all these different things. And then one day, Pat walks into my office and he just says, dude, I got it. I figured it out. It's the simplest of all the solutions. He drew it, and he drew the thing on my whiteboard, drew the lines of sun coming off of it. And he's like, now I just got to figure out the angles. And it was like, there it is. So all credit to Pat. Pat just had an aha moment, shared it with me on a whiteboard in like 5 minutes, and it was off to the races.
The other thing that I found particularly interesting was the way that the lamps or the bars cool themselves. Could you describe that process a little bit?
Sure. So what you don't see a lot in the LED space is proper amounts of aluminum to dissipate heat. So you'll notice with our bars, we have a lot of aluminum surface area above the actual circuit board itself. It's not that we put too much aluminum on, it's that a lot of competitors don't have enough. There's a simple calculation for how much aluminum you need to dissipate heat given the amount of watts you're putting into a specific surface area of a given bar or a given luminaire. And we just happen to not cut corners and provide the proper amount of aluminum. What we have, if you look at our extrusion, if you look at the bar and you cut away and you look down the length of the bar, you'll see that it's a highly polished aluminum surface area angled for the reflective nature that gives us the patented for the triangle. But there's also a lip at the top of it that allows airflow from the base. And on the base, there are also two more wafers, if you will, of aluminum that run the length of the bar. That creates airflow that actually sucks heat off of the circuit board where you don't want it, puts it into the hollow extrusion, and then that tiny surface area that's open on the top of the extrusion creates an exit for that air and draws it out. So it really does a great job of making sure that the heat is not on the circuit board, not in the aluminum, but even into the air, the ambient air above the fixture itself.
So it sounds like more of a premium product. How does it compare in terms of cost? But then how do you show the ROI to the cultivator?
Yeah, it's a good point. It costs us a lot to manufacture this product. And there's really not too much we can do to lower that cost for us beneath a certain threshold, because we have purposely engineered this on every level of componentry to thermal design to the quality of the driver, the circuit board itself, how we connect the circuit board, the fact that we mount the circuit board on graphite for the ultimate heat transference. We haven't cut any corners. Simultaneously, the LED space and the cannabis space is asking for lower price fixtures. There's a race to the bottom as you have dozens of entrants on a monthly basis flooding the market with much less expensive product, much more poorly designed product. So the way we built this company so far is to keep our company extraordinarily lean, really develop our go-to-market strategy by strategic partnerships, based on our relationships with our parent company, our cultivator company, and really not requiring a huge budget to market. Really going with grassroots reputation and personal relationships and business development like that. That's allowed us to have a relatively low operational cost to run our company, and allows us to be successful with a lot lower margins than other companies, other competitors are typically trying to shoot for. So even though we have a high cost, we're still selling in the mid-level. We're still selling at a baseline that is approximate to our competitors. So you basically are getting a BMW at a Kia prices, essentially.
Oh, right on. Are you manufacturing in Boulder?
We are doing partial assembly in Boulder, but we manufacture in Penang, Malaysia.
Okay. So what so far has been more profitable, growing or as an equipment manufacturer?
Well, that's an interesting question. How do I answer that? Growing takes a lot more initial capital to start up. But once you do it, you can do it successfully, it generates a pretty big footprint, especially if you're vertically integrated. Manufacturing can be more consistent, but it also takes less money up front to develop. And so we see it holistically. We see lighting as a significant portion of a whole systems approach to cultivation. And so what we like to do is, GrowRay, for example, just ran a program this past November and December with one of our investors in Chicago. It was called the Sente AgTech program. GrowRay is not going to just be a lighting company because that's a very singular technology. And even though our IP is there now, in the next 2 years, GrowRay will become more of an end-to-end technology solutions platform company. So the program we ran used our partners across the world to identify young, promising, new startup ag tech companies that had promise for driving efficiencies in cannabis. And the program sought to identify through a series of interviews, mentorship programs, and proof of concept testings, candidates that would emerge for great inclusion into the kind of the GrowRay portfolio of different solutions, whether it's wholly owned, partially owned, or just built as a strategic partnership. Because that's what really helps clients, is not just saying we have the best light in the world and you're on your own for everything else. It's saying we're cultivators too. Mm-hmm. We know we have the best light, but we've also learned what the best HVAC system is. We've also learned and tried what the best control system is, what the best dashboard is for controlling your system, and fertigation and everything else. GrowRay will have the ability to have part ownership of and strategic partnerships with an entire portfolio of end-to-end solutions. And that provides the most value to us, and it also provides the most value to the client because it's vetted out and proven.
So basically, you're checking out these new startups, seeing who has the best tech, and then for a piece of the ownership, you'll, like, would it be your consulting services? Basically, you go in and say, you need these lights, this HVAC, and so that way you're more of a consultative company than a lighting company?
That's pretty well put, and we are in early phases of this. So the consultative aspect has emerged organically just because of who we are and who our team is and their experience with cultivating. It seems though we just can't escape the fact that in order for us to be the most useful to our clients and help their businesses the most, we always end up participating in ways beyond lighting, always, especially when it comes to the rationale behind and implementation of the SOPs that are required to optimally grow under our lights. And so it's just a natural fit that, well, if we're going to be suggesting a slight tweak to NPK ratios and a frequent feeding schedule, then we're asked, well, what do you use for fertigation? What control systems have you had luck with? Those questions always come to us, and we love to answer them because it helps our client. Now, at this point, we're putting our skin in the game more and really helping young companies develop into the space that are promising and providing them with some opportunities to do proof of concept testing in some facilities we're associated with, and then allowing them to be part of our portfolio if we can show that not only does the technology stand alone, but it works in an integrated way with the other pieces of technology and the lights themselves to create a total footprint that has a very specific total aggregate kW consumption number associated with it, a grams per square foot certainty number associated with that. So you're really taking the risk out of things and making sure that a sustainable practice for a new cultivator or for a retrofit has all the bells and whistles answered for in a way that makes sense and is really more end-to-end than just product specific.
That's pretty cool. Like investigating the emerging tech in the industry. What have you seen out there that has kind of turned your head?
For us, it's the next generation here is data, and it's making not how do I put this? Anybody can collect data from the grow, right? There are sensors and nodes aplenty out there that deliver data back to a central brain or central hub or a central interface. Now, what do you do with that data? That's the big question, because you can provide data to a grower, but unless there's a specific plan for that data to drive specific results that match to a very well thought out series of standard operating procedures, then that data is useless or nebulous at best. So for us, dashboardizing a centralized control system that takes information from where you need it in every aspect of your grow, from your temperature to VPD to humidity to EC, soil temperatures, all the data you need, bringing it into a central location and then providing insights. Now that data has to then be used correctly to create alerts, automated responses, and potentially even training opportunities to solve problems.
I feel like that's been an issue in every industry, is everyone pushed towards big data and then they were like, we got it. So what now?
Exactly. Like, it's what you do with the data that's the most important thing. And unless you have a prescribed notion that this data is going to be used in service of maintaining SOPs and then optimizing those SOPs as you collect that data, now you're talking useful data, and that's where it's at for us.
I'd like to, even though your portfolio is expanding to more of a complete solution, going back to the lighting, can you talk specifically about how you help facilities cut costs, increase yield, and even like increase terpene concentration?
Yeah, you bet. So on the lighting side, we've found a sweet spot in terms of our spectrum. The spectrum is partially designed by our original co-founder, who's a PhD photobiologist. And what we found was, quite simply, that you want to have a full spectrum light, but you can't just arbitrarily have an undifferentiated blob of light. Like a lot of companies these days are using only different variations of white LEDs with the idea that, okay, you've got all the colors of the sun now, go for it. It's all there, full spectrum. What we found is that can be successful. However, you can get fractional or iterative improvements if you understand that it's not just the presence of the entire spectrum, it's the ratios between certain peaks of certain spectra. For example, the ratio between red and far red is just as important, if not more so, than just having red in far red. So it engenders a different response from the plant. So having a very specific ratio between the peaks of the varying colors that have specific photomorphogenic impact on the plant has been really important for us in terms of terpene production. This isn't like the biggest game changer in the world because intensity is more important than spectrum, and that's another takeaway. But what this does is give fractional advantage over the competitors. That's number one, and terpene production is one of the things we get from that ratio-based spectrum. Number two, uniformity of distribution is critical. Number three, there's a sweet spot in terms of the amount of light you're putting out for the amount of light, amount of watts you're asking the fixture to draw off the wall. Some companies have gone extreme and gone with LED products that actually use more wattage than an HPS, a double-ended HPS, with the idea that more is better. And to a large degree, it's true. But you're also giving up any kind of value of being sustainable if you're just using more wattage per square foot than an HPS system. So we found a sweet spot in terms of wattage in and light out where we get the best photomorphogenic outcomes at the right wattage. And so once again, that's not a game-changing thing. It's a fractional advantage that iteratively adds up to a competitive solution. Then, just as important as the lights are the SOPs around using our lights. And that's where we also differentiate. A lot of LED companies out there have learned that there are a couple of different things you have to do if you're used to growing with double-ended HPS and you replace those with LED. Everybody now knows that high-pressure sodium lamps emit a lot of light in the form of infrared, and that infrared heats surfaces, read leaf surfaces and bud surfaces, without affecting the ambient air. So the metabolic rate at which the cannabis plant is performing under HPS is temperature A, but the ambient temperature is temperature B, and there's a delta there. So a lot of the LED companies now are recommending that you run hotter rooms to account for that, because the ambient temperature is the same as leaf surface temperature with LED, whereas that's not the case with HPS. So that was kind of generation one SOPs, that plus CO2. We've taken it a few steps farther by doing R&D ourselves in our own facility under our own licenses. And that collaboration has led to once again, iterative, though impactful advances in what the actual SOPs are in terms of defoliation, in terms of nutrient and feeding frequency, in terms of minor tweaks to NPK ratios in your nutrients, to ambient temperature, to when do you turn your CO2 off? Is there too much CO2? Do you change your CO2 over the course of the grow? So we have all these things that we've done trial and error with, and we've emerged with a set of SOPs that really help clients kind of guarantee, if they follow them and adhere to them, a baseline of production per square foot that they can then build a business off of.
Talking about all the testing, how many different R&D facilities do you currently operate in?
We've kind of gone beyond the R&D phase at this point, and we have so many we've created a footprint of clients that we're more involved with collaboratively than just a client-vendor relationship. So our entire footprint is kind of an R&D footprint. We're really transparent and open with our own growing practices on the NOBO side, and we like to share data and collaborate. And on the GrowRay side, we like to be able to disseminate that and also, learn from our clients who are really more of our partners and friends at this point. And so there's like an ecosystem there that functions like a giant R&D environment. So we don't really have at this point like allocated rooms for R&D, although we're building a new one this summer. It's more that we have clients that grow every which way you can imagine, from single tier to double tier indoor to hybrid greenhouse to more open greenhouse. And all of our clients are interested in developments we have in terms of enhancing SOPs, new tech we have. And so the willingness to try new things among our client base is pretty unique. And we have access to what they find, and they have access to what we find.
So, a partnership's always great when it works out. But what happens when you're testing something new and it doesn't really go as planned, and maybe the grow is harmed as a result?
I guess that could happen. So far, we've never done anything that we couldn't account for up front. Like by the time a given technology or practice enters the conversation for deploying under license where P&L is on the line, typically we vetted it out enough so we know it's going to at least achieve baseline, if not an improvement.
Okay. Well, so you're just batting 1,000. That's amazing.
Well, we just never. It's more like we just don't strike out.
Yeah.
It may only be a base hit, but we can't. We don't want to jeopardize production under license. With trying something new. And typically we have a fallback plan. Like for example, if we're trying a new fertigation machine or a new fertigation technique, we'll make sure that we have a backup. You can always have a measured hand watering situation behind that. So there's just ways to make sure that risk is mitigated if you really plan it out in advance.
It sounds like you have an incredible brain trust at the head kind of at GrowRay. But one of the things that I've seen in the past with sort of more engineering heavy companies is that they really struggle with when to go to market. So as you guys continue developing, how do you know when to say, as the CEO, how do you know when to say, all right, guys, we're this one's going out. We're selling it.
Yeah. So good question. We learned the hard way on that one. The good, the bad, the ugly with that conversation. So GrowRay was in R&D for many, many years before it tried to go to market. And this is before my time with the company. So it got to a point where the iterative product development reached a critical mass, and it was clearly time to go to market. At this point, how do we make decisions on when to release something into the market? We're very, very careful. We trend on the side of caution for that. We spent so much time perfecting the triangular extrusion, the adaptive sensor, our spectrum, the quality of our product. We know that we have a lifespan for this product's legitimacy in the space that's going to be a few years just because of the economic results it can deliver. We know we've gotten there. And because we've been able to patent the two primary greenhouse solutions, we feel, not to be Pollyannish about it, we feel somewhat protected there, that we're not going to get completely ripped off right now. But for us to release something new, we've got to put it into a facility and have results from it, at least 3 turns or 3 cycles of data before we feel good about even taking it to the next level.
I saw that you were recently selected by, it was New Genetics in Lansing, Michigan for their 15,000 square foot grow. Could you talk a little bit about that partnership? And, was there a pre-existing relationship, or did you kind of go in cold?
No, that relationship goes back quite a ways. And it's one of those that, where I originally received an inquiry from the gentlemen who were putting that grow together. And we were up against a couple of other lights. And basically, over the course of the conversation, I convinced the gentlemen who were behind the project to go with us. Since then, it's been very successful. They've been a very successful operation because they've done it right. They recognized that using kind of a high output multi-bar LED in Michigan in a greenhouse would really allow them to compete during the low DLI or low light months from November to March economically. And so they've always looked at growing from that sweet spot between efficiency and production. So right away, the guys that launched that particular grow, we thought the same way about how to cultivate and how to use technology for cultivation. And now they've been at it for a while. You can see the results that they're getting are very, very impressive. And they run a clean facility. They run a facility that is envelope integritous. All the things you want to see in terms of that hybrid model where you're getting the best of controlled environment, sealed envelope agriculture with the benefit of the sun, and then with strong supplementary lighting.
Do you have your own grow?
Me personally?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
I was just curious if you still had time for, as a hobby.
I don't. Although I would like to. It would be fun to do it that way again. I just don't have time.
No, I get it. I mean, do you ever get to leave the office?
It's during COVID less than I want, that's for sure. But yeah, absolutely. A big part of our business is relationships. We've been traveling, in 2021 carefully. But yeah, I spent a lot of time before COVID out and about. Like everybody in the core group travels quite a bit. We like to be on site with our partners and build new relationships. It doesn't happen from the office. The office is the last place I want to be. Trust me on that one. So the more I can travel, the happier I am, and the better the company does.
How many people are in that core group?
The core group here at GrowRay, we have 7 people right now. Eight coming on board now.
Okay. Is there other than traveling, how did COVID impact your business?
Wow. So COVID, the biggest impact was shipping. The term shipageddon emerged from COVID, where you had congestion in ports and you had massive competition for container space on ships. And so we already had a pretty long lead time based on our manufacturer being in Penang, Malaysia. And so when COVID hit, our lead time increased first by 40%, and now it's basically double. So it's really forced us to have to double down on locating the right debt instruments to maintain landed inventory in the United States and kind of rethink our supply chain. It's been a huge impact to us.
Okay. Have you been able to navigate it all right?
So far we have. Yeah, we've been able to navigate it so far. It's definitely our biggest challenge right now. We think it's going to lighten up a little bit in the kind of mid Q2 to early Q3 timeframe. But we're reacting to it fast. And for example, in November, we put in a huge preemptive order of inventory. Almost an unhealthy amount of allocated capital towards that pre-inventory purchase, knowing that we'd have the clients for it when it landed. And so far, we've been lucky. That was the right bet. Now we're doubling down on that again and again and again. It just goes to show that I think we're entering a new era with supply chain management and trans-Pacific ocean shipments for high volume, high weight objects in shipping containers. There's not going to be a return to the old normal. The new normal is that the shipping industry itself has taken this opportunity to reconsolidate in a way that's not beneficial for a smaller company like ourselves. So this has really been a kick in the pants for us and forced us to kind of re-navigate our entire supply chain structure, which is actually a good thing long term.
Is there any apprehension with developing a product for an industry that's not legal on a federal level in the States yet?
No, not at all. In fact, the opposite. If you look at the growth outside of legality with that federal piece, the only real issues were access to traditional means of capital. So that's really the challenge, not developing products for the industry. The demand, if you have the right product at the right price and the right relationships and are trusted by the aggregate of the community, then no problems whatsoever.
Okay. What are your predictions for legalization? Maybe the next couple of states to turn and then on a federal level.
Well, I guarantee you my prediction is going to be wrong, but I think it's going to be slower than people think. I think once legalization gets passed, then it just takes a long time to implement that. And then when it's become practical in terms of affecting our industry, I still think we're years and years away.
Okay. Okay. So beyond the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think so. I think 3 to 4 years before you even see it potentially reach the point where it's on the Senate floor and it's a complete bill that has a chance to pass. Yeah, no question.
What does the future hold for GrowRay in your role with the company? It sounds like you're just looking to be sort of more of a cannabis tech company with, expanding beyond lighting.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to go that way. Lights are important. They're the biggest CapEx and OpEx for any grow. We know that it's the biggest driver of success or failure in terms of technology selection. But there are so many other technologies out there that work with lighting that are really part of a whole systems approach. And it would be a poor choice of ours not to leverage our expertise in those areas to create a more comprehensive solution that gave cultivators more certainty, more of a one-stop shop that was really integrated. It's better for us and it's better for our clients. And we've shown that even in the early phases already.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about is energy consumption, because it was my understanding that the lights being much more efficient, especially with Colorado State University coming out with the recent study about indoor production and particularly being a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Could you talk a little bit about how your product could have a positive impact in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, number one, I think that the lowest kW impact grow that still generates quality is going to be in a hybrid greenhouse with adaptive LED supplemental lighting. That's the main thing. So at that point, we have this thing called the adaptive sensor. It's our second piece of IP. And it's a sensor that's on the fixture and it reads the amount of natural sunlight present at that fixture at a given time and then adjusts the output of the light up or down according to the set point. So you're always using literally the theoretical minimum of kW to deliver even PAR, even PPFD, or even light across the canopy surface. So what growers don't want to do is move from an indoor controlled environment, high lighting density environment where they know they're generating numbers and making profit, to a greenhouse where historically the quality has been less than indoor or the production has been less than indoor. What we're finding is with the right SOPs, with the right approach to supplementary lighting, that you can actually get the same or better quality as an indoor grow with significantly less kW consumption. So that's the kind of glass ceiling to crack, is demonstrating to the community at large that, hey, there are ways to do this where you're not going to leave quality and quantity on the table just so you can achieve a lower kW in carbon footprint.
So 5 years from now, what does GrowRay look like?
5 years from now, GrowRay looks like an end-to-end solutions company where we have a different series of packages, either completely contained or a la carte, to where if you are an operator who wants to retrofit, we have a package that incorporates all of it, or you can select from a menu of different technologies. If you're doing a new grow, we have a cultivation team that can help you with everything from license acquisition all the way up through design build and different associated layouts for that, through HVAC, through our partnerships with the companies that we believe in. And then we're developing our own data and control system. So you can run this whole thing, lighting, everything else, through a custom dashboard that's going to have a lot of unique abilities that aren't currently offered in the space.
I typically like to start the conversation with it, but I figured I'd end this one. What was it personally that brought you to cannabis?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I've always loved cannabis. My profession before this was professional musician, and I still play a lot of music. And so it was always part of my culture, always part of my creative process, when I was younger. And I grew cannabis when I was in my early 20s successfully. Obviously, that may or may not have been legal where I lived, but it was something I really enjoyed. It's something that I find medicinal value to. I think it's vastly superior to alcohol in terms of providing, a transportational mechanism to get out of your day-to-day, mind noise. I've always used it for that. I think if you treat it respectfully, it's a wonderful, wonderful medicine that engenders creativity and open-mindedness and more of a sharing mentality. I think it's just a healthy thing for people to use and to enjoy. And so I've always just loved it from that perspective.
Are you still playing music?
I am. Yeah. I mean, not so much during the pandemic times, but yeah, I still play a little bit.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Man, I feel like I hear it a lot, but that's the one thing I've missed the most is going out and seeing some live music.
I'm right with you, man. It's been it'll be great to have that be teed back up and be able to see some music again, play a little bit too.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Again, if you could make sure to like, subscribe, or even leave a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening to this, it would really help us out a lot as we continue to grow this thing. That's for you, Alex. That one's for you. That's why I smiled. I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.